As we get ready to serve, it is important that we improve our vehicles to ensure the safety of our guests and ourselves. Outfit your vehicle with appropriate dividers to separate driver from passenger. Plexiglass or Velcro plastic divider may be used. Have a minimum of 2 hand sanitizers, one for you and one for your guests. Always carry extra mask and disinfectant in your vehicle. And post signs to remind passengers to use hand sanitizers and wear their mask and follow social distancing protocols.
When providing a service, it is important that the hands of the passengers are sanitized before entering the vehicle. Remember, a mask must always be worn by all occupants of the vehicle for the duration of the trip. At the end of the trip, remember to wish your passengers a good day. Ensure they have left no personal items behind and sanitize their hands.
Once you have completed your trip, remember to sanitize your hands and your vehicle. Seats must be disinfected and all high-touch areas, such as doors and seat handles, must be sanitized before your next trip. Let's do all we can to keep ourselves and our visitors safe.
Thanks to the nation's unified response, the spread of COVID-19 has been contained. St. Kitts and Nevis, therefore, announces the opening of their border on October 31st, 2020. The success of this strategy requires effort on everyone's part. People from all walks of life must keep practicing social distancing. Maintain a separation of 6 feet or 2 meters indoors and 3 to 4 feet or 1 meter outdoors. If this isn't possible, masks must be properly worn. Businesses can provide hand sanitizer, conduct temperature checks, record customers' contact information, and manage crowds. Clean and sanitize high-touch areas regularly. Dividers or staggered seating can be used to maintain proper social distance. This protects workers and customers and prevents the spread of disease. We all have an individual and collective responsibility to avoid large social gatherings. These types of gatherings are deemed as super spreader events. Taking disease prevention seriously will enable a worry-free return to normal life.
A pleasant good evening to everyone listening to the first Leadership Matters program for the new year 2021. My name is Jacqueline Bryan and I am your host this evening. I'm delighted to be here with you and delighted to hear from you a little later on in the program. This program is hosted by Prime Minister Dr. Timothy Harris, the Honorable Dr. Timothy Harris, and he has made this program a large part of his vision to engage you, the public, nationals living at home and abroad, on the things that are happening here in St. Kitts. Lots of important developments, and we are going to also have an important discussion here this evening because he is joined by members of the National COVID-19 Task Force. They will give an update and they will also provide important information on things that you should know about. So this evening, Prime Minister Dr. Timothy Harris is joined by Medical Chief of Staff at the JNF General Hospital, Dr. Cameron Wilkinson. He's also joined by Dr. Hazel Laws, who is the Chief Medical Officer in the Ministry of Health, as well as the Chairman of the National COVID-19 Task Force, Mr. Abdias Samuel, who is also the Disaster Management Head of NEMA, the National Emergency Management Agency. First, we'll begin with opening remarks from the Prime Minister, and he will be followed by Dr. Wilkinson, Dr. Laws, and Mr. Samuel, respectively. Mr. Prime Minister.
Thank you very much, Jackie, and I want to bid a special welcome to all those who are tuning to tonight's edition of Leadership Matters. I am certainly delighted to be back with Leadership Matters this evening. It is my pleasure to update the people of our country and all our well-wishers on the progress which my government is making as we build a stronger and safer future. I am also excited to hear directly from you about the issues that matter to you. Your government's priority for 2021 is to continue protecting our people from the worst effect of COVID-19. Our focus remains on protecting your health, protecting your jobs, protecting our way of life from the COVID-19 ravages. Working with you, we will see this pandemic through. We have a plan to come out the other side, a stronger and more unified nation with a renewed sense of purpose. Your Team Unity government, comprising the People's Labour Party, the People's Action Movement, and the Concerned Citizens Movement, is working with you to defeat COVID-19, to deliver better services, to protect jobs, and to look after working families. Yes, we have weathered the COVID-19 storm better than most countries, but I must advise and warn that COVID-19 pandemic is not yet over. In St. Kitts and Nevis, we are at a critical juncture in our management of the COVID-19 pandemic. We still face the worst crisis of a lifetime. Indeed, we face two crises. One, a health pandemic that has taken about 2.24 million lives, and the other, a brutal economic crisis that had caused 114 million direct job losses worldwide and reduced working hours. According to the ILO, the cumulative impact of direct job losses and reduced work hours is equivalent to 259 million full-time jobs being lost worldwide. Fortunately for us, because of our early and decisive actions to save lives, we made the saving of lives our first priority. That then, we executed a life-saving strategy. We have been able to weather the pandemic. The strong and effective leadership which my government demonstrated in its institutional and other responses to the pandemic, such as the setup of the National COVID-19 Task Force, the conceptualization and implementation of the all-of-society approach, our Life First strategy, and our comprehensive stimulus package brought significant beneficial results in this war against COVID-19. 11 months after the declaration of the pandemic, St. Kitts and Nevis is bruised, but far from beaten. We still have some fight left in us, and we shall not let up until the battle is won. It is the people of our beloved Federation who have unified during this time. It is because of your efforts, your sacrifices, that we have realized real gains in this fight against COVID-19. To date, St. Kitts and Nevis still has the lowest number of COVID-19 confirmed cases of all independent countries in the Americas. We remain the jurisdiction with the least risks of COVID-19. We have no deaths, and our health system, thankfully, is operating normally. By our continuing vigilance, discipline, and sacrifice, we can and we must save lives, protect our small and fragile health system, and put our country on a path to growth, realizing the 8% economic growth projected for St. Kitts and Nevis by the International Monetary Fund. Of course, this growth will not come by our waiting and hoping for the best. It will take discipline, industry, and ingenuity. Tonight, as we speak, the contrast is revealing between St. Kitts and Nevis and some advanced countries around the world, including the most powerful country, the United States of America. Our society here in St. Kitts and Nevis is operating as a functional unit. No lockdowns. Our schools are open. Our churches are centers of praise and worship. Every sector of society, including government, the private sector, the NGO sector, are functioning. Some not at pre-COVID-19 levels, but progress is being made. Our farmers and fishers are contributing to food security, aided by our budgetary support, and I want to congratulate and commend them. Our livestock farmers like George Jeffrey, our crop farmers like Keith Roy Matthew and Marsh in Molyneux, among others around our country. January, I'm advised, has seen an increase in the production of several crops, and we welcome this. In our manufacturing sectors, entities like Jaro, API Haro, Cajola Cristada, the Carib Brewery, Electrofab, Brush Company, the Marara Distillers, and Sun Island are opened. Carib Brewery is showing an increase in the number of employees. We are hopeful that with the approval of 2 of its buildings as being fit for purpose in the COVID-19 environment, Java will recruit an additional 75 persons by mid-year, taking its employee count to 300 plus. All our hotels, I'm advised, except for Birdrock Beach Hotel, are now opened. The occupancy is at a modest level, but given the reality of lockdowns and disorder in our main source markets, the United States of America, Canada, Europe, and the Caribbean, we are indeed grateful. We know there are people who, unfortunately, have been impacted, but we have not left them behind. Our social safety nets are the most comprehensive in the region, and they include, inter alia, assistance to the poor and indigent with medical bills, assistance with school uniform expenses, burial assistance for the poor, support for children in foster care, support to youth at risk, support for the children home, support to the New Horizon, payment to private daycare facilities based on their student enrollment, the Alternative Lifestyle Pathway Program, and the PAP. In 2021, we will spend over $43 million to help the vulnerable, the indigent, and at-risk members in our society. We could add to this another $60 million, which will help maintain over 3,000 persons on the STEP program. When you do the calculation, over $100 million in social safety net support, in empowering our people, in enhancing their dignity, you begin to understand how much my government has done to protect our people from abject poverty and to empower them. We do care for the poor and vulnerable. For this reason, in addition to the assistance we have provided through these programs I outlined, we are creating an environment that is conducive for increased employment opportunities. We will always look after workers because work gives people enhanced dignity and confidence in themselves. We will redouble our efforts to expedite the processing of severance claims. To date, from claims received as at the 31st of January 2021, 1,121 have been processed. 1,093 have been paid out. Claims are being processed on a first-come, first-served basis. I want again to remind employers to pay over their deductions from employees' payroll as soon as possible. Non-payment of contributions by employers is a major source of the delay in the processing of severance claims. Our employees must not wait until they are laid off to ask the Social Security to verify that their contributions were paid by the employers. You must do this regularly. Ross University has been our largest offshore tertiary level education facility in St. Kitts and Nevis. In 2021, during the first half, we expect the return of some 600 students to that facility. To date, I am advised that 342 of them have already returned. This means incomes for landlords, increased patronage for our restaurants and hotels, security services, car rental agencies, and we could go on and on. I want to turn to work prospects since job creation is at the heart of our prosperity agenda. And I'm pleased to note that earlier this month, the TDC Doors project started. I'm advised that 3 contractors have been engaged on the job. They are most present with their workforce. A new luxury villa project will get started in the first week of March at the Royal St. Kitts Hotel. And other private sector housing projects will be launched before mid-year. Our real estate CBI projects will continue. And from the public sector, we will see progress and our capital project in 2020. In addition, the solar project, which I am advised, is a US $60 million project involving Skelec and Leclanche, should add value to our economy. Some 60 capital projects directly impacting upon construction, including the Bastia High School and the construction of the prison facility, will be part of a plan $111.9 million to be invested by the government to boost construction. Indeed, for 2021, we have budgeted the largest capital budget to the tune of $192.7 million for 2021. I have some good news for those who reside in and around Sadlers. The closure of the Sadlers branch of the National Bank has been a matter of ongoing concern. The bank will be rebuilt in the second half of 2021, and it will be rebuilt bigger and better. I am so happy for the people of Sadlers. Their long season of denied convenient access to banking services in their community is being corrected. In conclusion, we can be optimistic about our future, and to God we give thanks. We have done the right things in the war against COVID-19 because they were right for our country. We made the right decisions at the right time. And we can congratulate ourselves as a people on our collective management of a dangerous pandemic, namely the COVID-19 pandemic. We have a success story to tell the world, and it includes the following lessons. Early preparation in advance of the pandemic helped to save lives in St. Kitts and Nevis and prevented the overwhelming of our health system here. Tough decisions were taken, like curfews, closing our borders, saying no to the entry of carriers from high-risk destinations. Safety of our country certainly cannot be subordinated to profit interests of individuals and entities. Their concern is their bottom line. The government interest must always be the safety and welfare of the people. Unity of purpose and action becomes critical. Hence, we brought all stakeholders together in an all-of-society approach. The science was followed here faithfully, and we did this, and we have found that it leads to consistent policy prescriptions with beneficial outcomes. Temporary fixes, such as some of the proposed rapid tests, are of dubious benefit. Hence, we insisted early on the PCR test as the only standard for entry into our country. One standard must be maintained, and hence the 14-day quarantine and the negative RT-PCR tests have been applied across the board to every visitor and national alike. Continual public education leads to buy-in and improved compliance with COVID-19 protocols. Hence, our NEOC briefings continue, and we are discussing the COVID-19 pandemic principally tonight. Expand testing using the gold standard is another important lesson. Here in St. Kitts, we move from complete reliance on CARFA lab facilities to having one local lab in the next generation being able to provide the appropriate tests for us. Imminently, we will have 4 labs with the capability to deliver accurate PCR test results. That is a major success story. Our successes, in my view, can become part of an international best practice. We have held over the last 11 months constitutionally due elections at the height of a pandemic using COVID-19 protocols, and according to CARICOM and local observers, our elections were free and fair. We held a successful national carnival, and this brought the largest social media viewership in its history. Although our borders have reopened, we have been able to contain the number of COVID-19 cases. Thank God, in St. Kitts and Nevis at this time, we have no community spread, no cluster spread, no deaths. In contrast, 2.2 million and counting deaths are recorded globally. And in the United States, they have recorded over 400,000 deaths. None to date in St. Kitts and Nevis. To God we give the glory. We have maintained the R number in St. Kitts and Nevis way below 1. In a manner of speaking, we have been able to contain the virus. When around the world, in Europe, United States of America, they are having spike, and there is an acceptance that COVID-19 is out of control. Our stimulus package was the largest and best within our region. It strengthened the health sector, put money in the pockets of displaced workers, protected the poor from indigence. Indeed, I should add that another success story has been our early participation in the COVAX facility, solidifying our position to receive vaccines. We secured a total of US $800,000 or EC 2.2 million commitment to procure vaccines from Taiwan and from the Alba Bank. Taiwan has committed US $600,000, and the Alba Bank recently committed a further $200,000 US. Yes, I am happy to be back on Leadership Matters tonight, and in particular to inaugurate the 2021 edition with 3 distinguished citizens of St. Kitts and Nevis who have worked so very hard and tirelessly to help the government develop and implement policies to keep all of us safe and secure. Our panelists tonight are 1, Dr. Hazel Laws, our Chief Medical Officer, Dr. Cameron Wilkinson, our Medical Chief of Staff, and Mr. Abdi Samuel, Chairperson of the National COVID-19 Task Force. I again do what I have done so many times, to commend them and their support team for yeoman service on behalf of our country. And I commend their commitment, their excellent service to all our citizens and residents. Thank you very much. And please do abide by the protocols so well known: the wearing of your mask, the regular washing of your hands, and so on. You know those. Please abide by them to keep yourself, your family, your community, and our beloved country safe. May God bless all the people of St. Kitts and Nevis. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Prime Minister. And I think it's important to note that both Dr. Cameron Wilkinson and Dr. Hazel Laws are members of the National COVID-19 Task Force. We will now hear from Dr. Cameron Wilkinson, who will make his opening presentation.
It has been just over a year now, starting December 2019, when the world learned about the virus that was causing severe respiratory illness and death in Wuhan, China. The virus was soon identified as SARS-CoV-2, responsible for COVID-19 disease. In early January 2020, it became evident that this deadly virus was making its way around the globe as increasing number of cases began to appear outside of China. Healthcare workers around the world found themselves strangers in a strange land, battling a new and deadly disease. We here in the Federation did not wait until it reached our shores to begin our preparations. We began a robust education program in January last year for all levels of healthcare workers so that they could be educated on the new viral disease, COVID-19. When it was declared a pandemic by the World Health Organization in March 2020, we were well prepared to confront the challenges. We followed the science and the advice of the World Health Organization and other reputable institutions like the Center for Disease Control, the Pan American Health Organization, and CARPHA. The recommendations were that all countries should increase their level of preparedness and response to identify, manage, and care for new cases of COVID-19, that countries should prepare to respond to different public health scenarios, cognizant of the fact that there was no one-size-fits-all approach in managing the outbreak of COVID-19, and that each country should assess its risk and rapidly implement the necessary measures at the appropriate scale to reduce both COVID-19 transmission and economic, public, and social impacts. We knew then from very early that there were tough decisions to be made and that we needed to strike a delicate balance between the containment of the virus and the socioeconomic impact from the containment measures, lives and livelihood. But in all decisions, saving lives must take precedence. That is why, for example, we were one of the first to turn back cruise ships in early March 2020 that we thought posed a significant risk of importation of the virus, while other Caribbean countries were still accepting them. We developed a strategy of preparedness and response plan to COVID-19 with the aims to slow and stop transmission, thereby preventing outbreaks, provide optimal care for all patients, especially the seriously ill, and minimize the impact of the epidemic on health systems, social services, and economic activity. Our approach was one of a whole-of-society approach to support preparedness and response, calling on everyone and every sector of society to play a role. The government injected $16 million into our health system to bring us into a state of readiness to fight COVID-19. We took a number of important decisions that got us to where we are today. The pandemic was declared a national emergency, and the National Emergency Operating Center was activated to address it under our chair, Mr. Abdi Samuel. The Health Emergency Operating Center was activated, and our team met on a regular basis, virtually and in person, to address the crisis headed by Dr. Hazel Laws, our CMO. We sensitized the public to their active role in the response and stressed the importance of personal responsibility in this fight. We kept you informed with regular public service announcements, press conferences, and filmed educational interviews on COVID-19 using every media outlet at our disposal. In addition to health worker education, we took the educational activity across the Federation to every school, major businesses, nursing care institutions, and the prison. A helpline was set up to address the public's concerns and was operational 24/7 in the early days of the pandemic, when not much was known by the public about the virus and there was widespread panic. We enhanced our hospital and community preparedness plan to ensure that space, staffing, and supplies were adequate for a surge in patient care needs. We prepared an infectious disease control manual that informed healthcare personnel at the institutions with protocols in dealing with every aspect of the COVID-19 patient, including handling the dead. We made structural changes to the emergency room at our main hospital, physically separating the treatment section for patients with flu-like illnesses from those with other medical emergencies. We augmented our staff at the emergency room by adding 7 extra doctors from our resident pool and brought in help from outside. 30 specialist nurses and 4 critical care specialist doctors were brought into the Federation from Cuba. 25 of these nurses were deployed in St. Kitts along with 3 of the critical care specialists. The others were deployed to Nevis. We are currently looking to extend their contracts to assist with mass immunization against COVID-19, which is on the near horizon. The Josephine France Hospital was identified as the institution that would house patients with COVID-19, and the private ward with 15 single rooms is the ward being used, with a plan to command more of the hospital if needs be. The other institutions, Mary Charles and Poxon, were also placed in a state of preparedness. All of our health centers were in a state of readiness, and the schedules were rearranged so persons with flu-like illness would be seen in the afternoons, while persons with chronic illnesses were seen in the mornings to reduce exposure. All of the preparations made in St. Kitts were mirrored on our sister isle, Nevis. We were also continually monitoring the market for new approved products to aid in the fight, be it laboratory diagnostics, therapeutics, and vaccine. We increased our equipment and supplies with the purchase of additional ventilators, infrared thermometers, PPEs, nebulizers, portable X-ray machines, defibrillators, and new ambulances. We continually assessed where we were and the effectiveness of what we had accomplished and used that information to plan future preparedness and response activities. We attempted to keep the virus at bay for as long as possible, but warned that it was only a matter of time before it reached our shores. We saw cases rise in major first world countries and around Caribbean neighbors, yet the Federation remained one of the few nations with 0 cases for an extended period of time. We were one of the last places on the face of the earth to have the virus cross its borders. When our first imported case arrived on the 25th of March last year, I remember the wave of panic that hit the nation. This was at a time in the disease history where not much was known, there was no effective treatment, and the death toll was climbing across the globe. We sought to calm the nation, but yet make persons aware of the magnitude of the challenge we face through daily COVID-19 briefings. The entire nation tuned in every day at 5 p.m. to hear the latest updates. We closed our borders in a timely manner on the 25th of March 2020 to curb the number of imported cases so that we would not overwhelm our health system, so-called flattening the curve. Prior to the closure of our borders, those who could leave, left. I remember sitting in one of the early meetings with Prime Minister Harris and other cabinet members discussing the challenges we face. The mood in the room was very somber. There are a few words from that meeting that PM said that resonate with me even today, and I quote, "All we have now is us. All we have is us. There is no one else who's coming to help us, and we have to do everything within our power to survive this pandemic." Those few words express the enormity and severity of the task we had at hand as a nation. For us, it was an urgent call to action, and we all set to work. We started a robust testing, isolation, and quarantine program. We ensured that all who needed to be tested were tested using the gold standard PCR test and isolated all positive patients and quarantined anyone with a potential exposure. To date, we have tested 7,923 persons with 39 positive, a positivity rate of 0.5%, which puts us way below the 5% threshold that the World Health Organization asks countries to aim for as an index of control of the disease. I am happy that we were able to move from the dependency on CAFA in Trinidad for our testing with the development of reliable local testing capacity through next-gen laboratories. We were therefore able to get results in a timely manner and make informed decisions re isolation and quarantine. We will soon see an expansion of our testing capacity with the gold standard PCR test as the Josephine France Hospital, Avalon, and Quality Diagnostics come on board. We knew that it was only through strict adherence to science that we could succeed, and we kept this at the core of every decision we made. The protocols imposed with regards to COVID-19 were without exception across the board. You were quarantined or isolated if you needed to be, whether you were friend, family, or foe, royal or commoner. We imposed a national lockdown and curfews to contain the virus, and we were one of the few nations to avoid community spread to date. Though we were criticized for a 14-day quarantine while some countries chose to not to quarantine or had a much limited quarantine period, we stuck to what we believed, backed by scientific evidence. We mandated the use of the gold standard PCR tests and ignored calls to use less reliable antibody and antigen tests. We have since seen what has happened to other countries that chose less stringent protocols. While initially they appeared to be making progress with the opening up of their economies, many are now returning to nationwide lockdowns and curfews. Time has proven that our early decisions were correct, and many countries are now introducing measures we had in place for some time now as they attempt to return their horses to the stables. We did not, however, just lock ourselves in the basement and await for the passage of the pandemic, but attempted to move slowly back to some sense of normalcy internally. We successfully held constitutionally due elections during this period, ensuring that every citizen exercised their right to vote while abiding by COVID-19 protocols to prevent spread. We slowly reopened our country internally and saw the reopening of churches, schools, the manufacturing industry, restaurants, and the return of sporting events. We provided protocols for event organizers so events could be held safely during the pandemic. Throughout all of this, we kept the viral reproductive number way below 1, meaning that we prevented one person from infecting another, thus avoiding clusters and community spread. On the 31st of October 2020, we reopened our borders to international travel and warned that the virus would soon return. We made an early decision to exit the proposed Caribbean bubble to protect our people, as other countries in the bubble had less stringent entry protocols. Time proved that this was a correct decision, as some of those countries are now experiencing community spread. We have seen an increase in the number of imported cases since the opening of our borders, which was inevitable, but have successfully contained all the imported cases. We still were able to show the world that in the middle of a pandemic, we can safely host a carnival, and had a successful virtual Sugar Mass 49 under the chair Shannon Hawley. We have seen success at containing this virus with the prescription of non-pharmaceuticals, social distancing, wearing a mask, hand sanitizing, and proper cough etiquette. Because of the personal responsibility assumed by most, if not all of our citizens, we have contained the virus thus far with no major hospitalizations and as yet no deaths, despite the fact that globally there are over 2.2 million deaths, and over 440,000 deaths in the United States. Of note, January was the deadliest month in the USA since the pandemic, with over 95,000 persons dead, equivalent to one person dying every 30 seconds for the entire month of January. The success of this little federation in managing COVID-19 has caused us to be recognized internationally as the country with the lowest rate of confirmed COVID-19 cases and having the lowest COVID-19 risk in the hemisphere. I commend the leadership, starting with our PM, for getting us this far, but it would not have been possible without the cooperation of you, the public, and the personal sacrifices many had to endure along this path. Tonight, I want to say thanks to each and every one of you who made an effort in this fight. The crisis is, however, not over. The war against the virus is not done. We can lose all the gains we have made tomorrow if we lapse into complacency and succumb to COVID fatigue. With new and contagious strains emerging, we need to be even more vigilant. Our plan was to hold strain until the vaccine arrived. We have been successful thus far in reaching this goal. There are now a number of vaccines available with very good efficacy at preventing severe disease and death. We have all made personal sacrifices in the successful fight thus far against this deadly virus. And of course, some made greater sacrifices than others. We thank the Almighty God, however, that of the 2.2 million deaths globally, none were from the Federation of St. Kitts and Nevis. Let us continue the fight. I thank you.
And I thank you, Dr. Wilkinson, for sharing that update and overview with us. We will now hear from Dr. Hazel Laws, who is the Chief Medical Officer in the Ministry of Health.
Thank you, Ms. Bryan, and a warm good evening to all tuned in. St. Kitts and Nevis has reported 39 confirmed cases of COVID-19 between March 2020 and present. 36 cases have recovered fully, and so we only have 3 active cases. Some of our CARICOM member states have experienced increases in the number of COVID-19 cases, and some member states have moved from sporadic cases to wider community spread. There have also been reports of the new variant strains of the SARS-CoV-2 variants in the region. Tonight, my opening remarks will try to cover 3 objectives. 1, provide you an update on the SARS-CoV-2 variants. I'm going to provide you an update on the COVID-19 vaccines, and we will summarize the way forward. Now, there are 3 SARS-CoV-2 variants of public health concern. They are the UK variant, the South African variant, and the Brazilian variant. The UK variant was identified through viral genomic sequencing in the United Kingdom in November 2020. It is defined by multiple spike protein mutations. This variant has been identified in at least 3 Caribbean member states so far and in over 50 countries globally as of January 20. It is estimated to be 50 to 75% more transmissible than previous variants, but does not appear to increase reinfectivity. There is realistic possibility that infection with the UK variant is associated with an increased risk of death compared to infection with the non-variant virus. The second variant, the variant identified in South Africa, was first identified in October 2020. As of January 19, 2021, it has been identified in at least 20 countries or territories. It presents with a different pattern of multiple mutations of the spike protein. It is more transmissible than previous variants. There is emerging evidence for the potential for reinfection. The third variant was first identified in December 2020 in Brazil. This variant has been identified in at least 3 countries or territories. There is the potential for increased transmissibility as well as reinfection. In essence, these variants are more transmissible. 2 are associated with an increased prospect of reinfection, and 1 seemed to be associated with a higher case fatality rate. However, so far, there appears to be no change regarding the impact of the COVID-19 vaccines, says Dr. Kate O'Brien, the WHO Director of Immunization, Vaccines and Biologicals. Scientists are conducting ongoing research on these 3 SARS-CoV-2 variants regarding transmissibility, reinfection, and case fatality rates. Based on the foregoing, the aim is to keep these three variants away from our federation for as long as possible. Since we do not know exactly when either of the variants will cross our borders, we must maintain the COVID-19 prevention and control measures, which include wearing face masks when in public, maintaining good hand hygiene, maintaining physical distance, and avoiding large gatherings of people. These measures will prevent the spread of any of these variants if on island. Now I will turn my attention to the COVID-19 vaccines development, approvals, and access. There are 63 vaccine candidates in clinical development, and there are 63 vaccine candidates in clinical development, and 16 are being tested in phase 3 trials. 13 vaccines with phase 3 trial data are at various stages of the World Health Organization emergency use listing process, or they have expressed interest. So far, the World Health Organization has only approved one vaccine. That's the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine. The AstraZeneca and Oxford vaccine is expected to be approved in the first week of February. There are some Caribbean countries that have already approved vaccines, and these include the United Kingdom Overseas Territories, Anguilla, Bermuda, British Virgin Islands, the Cayman Islands, Montserrat, and the Turks and Caicos, and Guyana. The Federation of St. Kitts and Nevis has signed on to the COVAX facility, which is a global mechanism developed to help participating member states gain access to COVID-19 vaccines. The Federation just received a letter from the Managing Director of the COVAX Facility Office, dated January 29, 2020, providing information regarding the first tranche of the assigned COVID-19 vaccines to satisfy COVAX's agreement with the Federation. We were informed that St. Kitts and Nevis can expect to be distributed an indicative number of doses of the AstraZeneca and Oxford University vaccine. We have been allocated 21,600 doses that will provide coverage for approximately 20% of our population. The start date of delivery is as early as mid to late February. However, this is subject to WHO listing approval process and completion of the next steps. The next steps include things like implementation of our vaccination deployment plan and regulatory preparedness. The estimated supply schedule indicates that 25 to 35% of this amount will be supplied in the first quarter and 65 to 75% in the second quarter of this year. The Federation is seeking access to COVID-19 vaccines through two other mechanisms. Access to the COVID-19 vaccine is crucial to curbing the spread of COVID-19 infections and restarting our economy here in our Federation, the economy in the region, and globally. So what's the way forward? We must continue with the St. Kitts and Nevis health and travel protocols, which includes submission of the pre-arrival RT-PCR COVID-19 test done within 72 hours of travel and completion of the 14 days quarantine or vacation in place. As a federation, we must continue to maintain border surveillance. We must monitor our borders. As a federation, we must maintain the COVID-19 prevention and control measures, wearing of the face mask, maintaining adequate hand hygiene, physical distancing, and avoiding crowds. As a federation, we must access COVID-19 vaccines. The plan is to access enough vaccines to provide coverage for at least 20% of our population in the first instance, and the ultimate goal is to attain a coverage of at least 70%. It would be ideal if we can achieve the herd immunity threshold, which in turn will reduce the risk of clusters of COVID-19 cases and community transmission. In closing, I want to share a personal experience. On January the 7th, 2021, I received a question via WhatsApp, and I quote, "If you have the choice," so this is a friend who sent me this question, and the question read, "If you have a choice of catching COVID-19 or taking the vaccine, which would you do now?" And my response was, I would choose the vaccine now. I want to share the rationale for my response. So if I were to get COVID-19, one of 5 things may happen to me. 1, I may recover without any symptoms, or I may have moderate symptoms. I may develop severe disease, I may end up in the intensive care unit, or I may die. If I were to take the vaccine, I am assured that it would prevent severe disease and death. And the chances of adverse effects to date seems relatively low. And so I repeat, my response is I would take the COVID-19 vaccine now. And so I implore each and every one of us to consider or reflect on this question. Try to get as much information as you can about the COVID-19 vaccine and choose wisely. Hashtag choose COVID-19 vaccine. I thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Laws, for that update and the information you shared. We will now move on to Mr. Abdir Samuel, who is the chairman of the National COVID-19 Task Force.
Pleasant good night, Jackie, and a pleasant good night to all who are viewing and listening via various means. I want to take the opportunity to express my gratitude to the Honorable Dr. Timothy Harris, Prime Minister of the Federation of St. Kitts and Nevis, for inviting me once again to participate on this panel of Leadership Matters, along with my colleagues who have been working assiduously in that of Dr. Hazel Laws, our CMO, and Dr. Wilkinson, our Medical Chief of Staff. It's also imperative for me to update the nation on the status and the present status of the country, and also the progress we have made for the past year and the projected actions we seek to implement to keep our nations safe. I think my colleagues have said enough, and I will just basically highlight some of the things we have done. Allow me to take you through memory lane for a short while. From since January 21 to March 30th, 2020, there were significant activities that were taken by the National Disaster Coordinator and the CMO at the time as we gathered our groups together to ensure that we have a proper understanding of what we needed to do to prepare and respond to the threat of the novel coronavirus then. We began with a number of activities which I will highlight to you. For example, the training of frontline workers, sensitizing of a number of medical individuals, and also bringing together the Mitigation Council to ensure that everybody was on board. In 1st of February, we advised the Cabinet, and the first travel advisory was issued to citizens and residents to restrict travel from China. We were one of the first independent nations to do so in the Southern Hemisphere. We continued with our activities with meeting with a number of stakeholders, and these stakeholders would have been apprised of what they needed to do in order for us to have the all of society approach. A travel advisory that was issued in response to the rapid intensification and widespread distribution of the COVID-19 cases globally was done in the interest of protecting our borders, as we would have had persons returning from China after celebrating the China's New Year's. We then expanded our travel advisories to countries such as Iran, Hong Kong, Singapore, South Korea, Japan, and in Europe, Switzerland, United Kingdom, and by extension, French and Dutch territories in the Caribbean, and lastly, the United States of America. On March the 25th, when the 2 confirmed cases were detected, the country would have gone into an effective lockdown as of 11:59 p.m. Equally so, we would have seen the Honorable Prime Minister announce one of the biggest stimulus package that would have bigger than any other packages in the region. On the 30th of March, we would have experienced the activation of the National Emergency Operations Center along with the Emergency Operations Center on Nevis. The fake news of the novel coronavirus that was creating havoc in our federation was mitigated by the implementation of a risk communication strategy in which we saw the daily briefings at the NEOC being activated. We saw and experienced as a country the implementation of emergency powers that would have restricted and assisted in the response to the novel coronavirus. It is important to note that on the 20th of April, all 15 cases that were first initially detected in the Federation of St. Kitts and Nevis, all were recovered. In this regard, we continued with the slowly opening of activities, relaxation of activities. Churches in the Federation of St. Kitts and Nevis were open under specific COVID-19 protocols in accordance to the regulation. Equally so, it must be highlighted that the government of St. Kitts and Nevis, after being consulted, would have repatriated students from Jamaica, Barbados, Cuba, Trinidad and Tobago, and Guyana, and by extension, those who were in the United States, to a sum of over $1 million in covering their quarantine, travel arrangement, and testing. We were very successful in going through what was determined as an overly active hurricane season that would have caused somewhere between $60 to $65 billion of damages in 2020. We also weathered the infiltration of our borders by illegal immigrants, which were detected due to the assistance of you, the general public. That infiltration could have caused an outbreak in this country. However, by the proactive approach and assistance of you, we were able to address this situation. In July of 2020, we would have continued with a number of training initiatives in order to prepare the Federation for the reopening of the borders. And St. Kitts, the St. Kitts Tourism Authority would have trained some 3,158 persons working in the hotel industry, while at Nevis, the Nevis Tourism Authorities and the health officials would have trained 1,714 individuals for a total of 4,872 persons being trained within the tourism industry for them to be able to function under the COVID-19 in the context of COVID-19. We continue to lessen the restrictions caused by this pandemic, and the Honorable Prime Minister would have mentioned, along with my colleagues, some of these restrictions in terms of opening the bars, churches, educational institutions, et al. We also saw the restrictions being lifted on our fishermen and our farmers, who were tasked with ensuring that food security would be of high priority for us. We also saw the repatriation of Ross University students, where 124 students were brought from the United States under strict COVID-19 protocols, and a second batch within the month of September being brought to the sum of 170. Since the reopening of our borders on the 31st of October 2020, there have been 2,620 passengers arriving in St. Kitts, while 326 passengers arrived on Nevis, for a total of 2,946 passengers arrival since the opening of our borders. There was an approximately 70% of returning nationals and residents made up this number. Since our borders have opened, there were a total of 1,838 passengers departing our borders in St. Kitts, and 2,775 passengers departing our borders and Nevis, for a total of 2,113 passengers departing the Federation. And at this time, I would like to highlight the hotels that would have been providing vacation in place, in that of the Royal St. Kitts, Park Hyatt, the St. Kitts Marriott Hotel, and Four Seasons on Nevis. As time grew, we added the Golden Rock and Montpelier to provide same. Then we had quarantine facilities, the OTI on St. Kitts, Parkworks on Nevis, Boardwalk Apartment Complex, Ocean's Edge, and recently the Koi Hotel. We continue to create opportunities for our nationals residents to return to the Federation within an accommodable space and also price. For example, we are in further discussion with Sugar Bay Club, Timothy Beach Resort, and Kitishan Hill. We have done extremely well in our screening, surveillance, detection, monitoring, and management system of the novel coronavirus in entry to the Federation. The system put in place, such as the national entry form, and also the monitoring process and the processing process, have worked rather well. Going forward, we are looking at strengthening the corridor of containment, as we have had a number of breaches that have been responded to swiftly. We also want to increase the testing of persons working in certain industries, and also we want to increase the surveillance, monitoring, and enforcement through the deployment of more human resource in critical areas. We are doing all of this in order for us to create more economic activities for our citizens. In closing, I am encouraging all citizens to trust our medical expert and your hard-working task force, and by extension the government, in preparing ourselves to be one of the fastest vaccinated independent country in the Southern Hemisphere. I believe in you, the people of St. Kitts and Nevis. Mr. David Axelrod, former senior advisor to President Barack Obama, once said to Obama, "Hard things are hard." St. Kitts and Nevis will continue to rise over these hard times. Before I close and end this presentation, I would like to acknowledge the members of the Federal Cabinet and the Honorable Prime Minister for being diligent in leading this country and supporting these efforts. Also, I would like to acknowledge the Ambassador Tom Lee for the contribution by the people of the Republic of China and Taiwan to our Federation, the Christian Council and Evangelical Association. I would also like to acknowledge the hard-working team within the task force, in that of the Honorable Attorney General, Mr. Vincent Barron Jr., the Honorable Wendy Phipps, the co-chair of the Mitigation Council, Dr. Hazel Lodge, CMO, Dr. Wilkinson, Mr. Hilroy Brandy, Commissioner of Police, Superintendent Henry, Lieutenant Colonel Anthony Comrie, Mr. Denzel James, CEO SCASPA, Mr. Kennedy De Silva, Head of Compliance, Mr. Rohan Walters from the Legal Department, Ms. Ophelia Blanchard, Senior Representative from the IT Department, Ms. Kebas, Permanent Secretary in Foreign Affairs, Ms. Merslin Hughes, Chief Immigration Officer, and Mr. Lesroy Williams, Press from the SKNIS. I also want to highlight Ms. Karen Hughes and Alison Isaac, who were the drafters of the COVID-19 regulation. members of the NEOC, members of the HEOC, the Chamber of Industry and Commerce, St. Kitts and Nevis Red Cross, St. Kitts and Nevis Amateur Association, Radio Association, the NTRC, and regionally, I would like to thank CDMO, PAHO, CAFA, Impacts, RSS, ECTEL, US Southcom, USAID AFDA, the British High Commission, the US Embassy in Barbados. Please allow me to commend you, the citizens and residents of the beautiful country, in particular those who provide information that has led to the apprehensions of offenders of the laws. We must give God the glories and high praise for what we have done so far in this federation. And with that said, I want to thank you and admonish you to adhere to the protocols. Thank you.
And I want to thank you, Mr. Samuel, for sharing that information with us and for giving us that update. At this point, we're going to take a short break, and once we come back, we're going to open up our phone lines so we can hear from you.
As we get ready to serve, it is important that we improve our vehicles to ensure the safety of our guests and ourselves. Outfit your vehicle with appropriate dividers to separate driver from passenger. Plexiglass or Velcro plastic divider may be used. Have a minimum of 2 hand sanitizers, one for you and one for your guests. Always carry extra mask and disinfectant in your vehicle, and post signs to remind passengers to use hand sanitizers and wear their mask and follow social distancing protocols.
When providing a service, it is important that the hands of the passengers are sanitized before entering the vehicle. Remember, a mask must always be worn by all occupants of the vehicle for the duration of the trip. At the end of the trip, remember to wish your passengers a good day. Ensure they have left no personal items behind and sanitize their hands.
Once you have completed your trip, remember to sanitize your hands and your vehicle. Seats must be disinfected and all high-touch areas, such as doors and seat handles, must be sanitized before your next trip. Let's do all we can to keep ourselves and our visitors safe.
Thanks to the nation's unified response, the spread of COVID-19 has been contained. St. Kitts and Nevis, therefore, announces the opening of their border on October 31st, 2020. The success of this strategy requires effort on everyone's part. People from all walks of life must keep practicing social distancing. Maintain a separation of 6 feet or 2 meters indoors and 3 to 4 feet or 1 meter outdoors. If this isn't possible, masks must be properly worn. Businesses can provide hand sanitizer, conduct temperature checks, record customers' contact information, and manage crowds. Clean and sanitize high-touch areas regularly. Dividers or staggered seating can be used to maintain proper social distance. This protects workers and customers and prevents the spread of disease. We all have an individual and collective responsibility to avoid large social gatherings. These types of gatherings are deemed as super spreader events. Taking disease prevention seriously will enable a worry-free return to normal life.
We are all in this together.
And we all have a part to play to keep our island COVID-free.
Play your part and stay safe and healthy.
Our borders will soon be reopened. Get ready.
So what are you doing to keep St. Kitts COVID-free? touching the mask, clean hands with an alcohol-based hand rub or soap and water. Take the mask and inspect it for tears or holes. Orient which side is the top side where the metal strip is. Ensure the proper side of the mask faces outwards, the colored side. Place the mask to your face. Pinch the metal strip or stiff edge of the mask so it molds to the shape of your nose. Pull down the mask's bottom so it covers your mouth and your chin. After use, take off the mask. Remove the elastic loops from behind the ears while keeping the mask away from your face and clothes. To avoid touching potentially contaminated surfaces of the mask, discard the mask in a closed bin immediately after use.
Those persons returning or coming in from a Caribbean bubble territory. And the second category involves persons coming in from outside of the Caribbean bubble territory. And I mean persons who would be coming in from the USA, United Kingdom, and further afield. And even persons coming in from Jamaica and Dominican Republic, they all fall into that other category, which carries a significant risk of exposure to the virus. So the question is, if I am a traveler and I'm thinking of coming to St. Kitts and Nevis, what are the pre-arrival requirements? Well, you will be asked to log on to the site, the website, the URL www.knatravelform.kn. There you will see the St. Kitts and Nevis entry form, which Ophelia Blanchard would have just walked you through. And so every traveler coming into the Federation will be required to complete this entry form. So if you're coming in by air or by sea, you would have to complete this form. You would also be required to provide us the result of a PCR test that must be done within 3 days of travel. So if you are coming to St. Kitts this Saturday, you would have had to go to your lab this morning, and to get your sample taken, test process, to get the result by Thursday, Friday, ahead of boarding the plane on October the 31st. This PCR test must be done at an ISO accredited laboratory in the traveler's host country. And so what I've been telling travelers, just Google, just put in your home address and Google for the nearest ISO accredited laboratory in your area.
Welcome back to Leadership Matters, the first for 2021. My name is Jacqueline Bryan. I'm your host this evening, and joining Dr. the Honorable Timothy Harris on his program this evening are members of the National COVID-19 Task Force, and they are Dr. Cameron Wilkinson, who is the Medical Chief of Staff at the JNF General Hospital, Dr. Hazel Laws, Chief Medical Officer in the Ministry of Health, and the Chairman of that committee, Mr. Abdias Samuel. And they have made very important presentations here this evening. And this is a segment of the program that's just as important as the first half, the part where we hear from you. Yes, we are going to open up the phone lines now so we can take your calls, your comments, questions, or queries. We have several numbers through which you can participate in the show. The landline number is 466-2666. We have 2 mobile lines, and they are 662-8674, as well as 767-4765. And we also have an international line. That number is 1-239-645-4500. And as a result of the large number of persons who attempt to participate in the show each week, more ways for you to participate have been created. A new WhatsApp number has been added through which you can send voice notes. Now, the thing with the voice note is that because we are not able to engage you, you're being asked to keep your voice message very brief and direct, whether it's a question or a comment. So, for WhatsApp messages, you can send that message to 661-5683, and to send a voice note, you can send it to 660-7168. So those numbers for your convenience are listed at the bottom of the screen. We are excited to hear from you, and we want to hear from as many of you as possible, so all callers this evening are asked to be brief and to the point, and we're asking also that you keep your questions, comments, and queries, as well as suggestions and recommendations, limited to the presentations that have been made already or health-related matters. So at this point, we're going to go straight to the phone lines and take your calls. Welcome to Leadership Matters. Good evening.
Hello, good evening, Jacqueline. How are you?
I'm fine, and yourself?
If I complain, I will be lying.
Oh, don't complain, don't lie.
Yes, and you're looking very lovely.
Oh my, you're trying to make me blush on live on the air.
Anyhow, good night to the panelists, and good night to, I must say, Happy New Year to each and every one. Yeah, the program is very timely. It's appropriate based on what is happening globally and is affecting the Federation of Thinkers and Navies. I want to say kudos, give credit where credit is due in relation to the hard personnel at the task force, including your panelists. In relation to the COVID-19, what we are realizing is that what was done in the Federation was key. Because as we are seeing now, our neighboring countries, they are having lockdown. We do not want to go to that stage, but my issue at present is that I think a lot of us in the Federation is still taking this thing for granted, and I will urge the authorities, rather than every week speaking about person wearing a mask and doing the protocols, I think it's time for action. Because we do not want to let down our guard and then we reach into that same stage where we are seeing, and especially with this new variant is coming up and now our borders are open, we have to be very careful. So I will urge the authorities, it's time for action, rather than just speaking and saying the same thing over and over, appealing. Some persons are just taking it for granted. So I just want us as a federation to realize we are in a good place. We don't want to go back down to the lockdown, but we have to follow the protocol. As usual, a very good program, and I will allow someone else to get in. Have a good night.
I'm happy you're enjoying the program. We'll take another call. Welcome to Leadership Matters. I'm going to ask you, sir, if you can lower the volume on your computer, television, or radio.
Yes, I've done that.
Thank you so much.
Yes. Good evening to all concerned, and welcome back, Mr. Prime Minister, and the COVID-19 task force. My first question is very brief. Has nothing to do with what y'all spoke about tonight. But on Sunday night, just two nights ago, I was looking at a television program, and on it, a U.S. program actually, and they were showing some poodles and chihuahuas which were trained to sniff out persons with COVID-19. And having done that, I figured it was a bit strange. So I called somebody in the States today, and they told me that they saw the same thing, but in live action at a basketball game last night, where dogs were used in the lineup for persons, the fans entering the arena where they were sniffed for COVID-19. What I want to know is there a special scent given off by persons who are affected by the virus? That's one. The next thing is you mentioned about the different variants from the UK, South Africa, and Brazil. The PCR tests that we do here, can we be assured that these tests can detect all the various viruses that are out there in relation to COVID-19? Thanks a lot.
So much, and I think what you've done is also important. This provides an opportunity for persons to ask questions about things they've heard in the news maybe. So if you saw anything on television, on any major news network, and you'd like to put it to our health officials, now is also a good time to do so. We'll take another call. Welcome to Leadership Matters.
Yes, good evening. I want to wish the Prime Minister and the Cabinet a Happy New Year, and Mr. Samuels and Dr. Okay, the panelists, right? I want to wish you all a Happy New Year. And I want to thank you all for making this country safe. And I don't know how we're going to repay you. But I noticed that you always get some kind of reward the other day. So I want to know when the Prime Minister will give the other half, like your husband, your wife, and son, a reward too for those sleepless nights you all had. God bless you all. God bless St. Kitts. God bless the unity government. God bless all you.
Thank you so much, sir. Welcome to Leadership Matters. We'll take another call. Welcome to Leadership Matters. You're live.
Good night, Leadership Matters. Good night to the panelists.
Good night.
Good night to Ms. Jacqueline Bryan for continuing to take up the role from Valencia Grant. Good night to the Honorable PM. As you know, Leadership Matters, and you continue to use young people in your Leadership Matters. Because you know I have Jacqueline Bryan, who's doing a marvelous job. PM, I want to congratulate you. I want to say thanks for keeping the country safe when this COVID-19 hit us. There were so many talks. Oh, you locked down the country. Oh, you have us under curfew. But now we are seeing the repercussion of what are the steps you take and the team, the COVID-19 task force team. So there's no talk now to say well, you're doing a bad job. But before, they wanted to crucify you for keeping the country locked down and gradually opening it. Now we have players coming in. Now who want to come in can come in. But we are saying you must quarantine for 14 days. With that said, is there any plans in the near future to reduce the quarantine from 14 to 7 days, which might attract more visitors to our show? Would it be a health risk if the quarantine days reduce from 14 to 7? And I move on. Also, in the news article sometime recent, it was issued that some grant was being given for the COVID-19 test. What the public want to know is that will this test be mandatory? Who will be the first person to receive these tests here? And when could we expect the test? As in the news, we have seen the UK already start getting their vaccine, and it's a second dosage. So maybe you can kind of highlight if you reach thus far, there's a time frame when we can see a vaccine here in St. Kitts. And my last question, is there a new SRO in place? I know usually, you get them for a period of time, which kind of give the government the power to make sure in case of there's any emergency, if there's any outbreak, you can choose the decision to say whether we're going to be a partial lockdown or whatever. But nevertheless, you can see that Mr. Samuel and his team have done a good job in every week reminding the persons about the mask, reminding about sanitization. We've seen the school, sports gradually opening. We have seen entertainment, who seems to be getting a hard lick, but nevertheless, they are still getting some time to party. Jim, I did a good job. They tried to silence me, but they will not silence me, because I will continue to speak the good work that Team Unity is doing, to tell them they will not silence Bucky got it, and Bucky always got it. Over and out.
Thank you so much for your participation in this evening's program. We'll go right back to the phone lines. Welcome to Leadership Matters. Hello?
Hello?
Hi, good evening. You're live.
Good evening. My name is Louisa Skeen from Connery. Congratulations to St. Kitts and Nevis leadership and medicinal team for all they've done. I would like to ask a question. Who and when will it be decided once we have the vaccine, who will get the vaccine first? What age group? Who will decide that? And where will you start to do the vaccinations? Thank you.
Thank you so much for that question. We'll take a few more calls and then we'll pause to get some responses. Welcome to Leadership Matters. You're live.
Hi, good evening.
Hi,
you guys have been doing a fabulous job, and that's why we are so short on COVID. And we are very proud of what you guys are doing and what we are doing. And so continue to doing the job. Good job. 14 days for not having the COVID is fabulous. I work in the tourism industry, and I've been suffering as a lot of billions of people who have been suffering, millions of people who have died from this COVID. And so keep on doing what you guys are doing. I have no quarrel in that. Just continue. What my question is right now is, as a fellow taxi driver, I noticed that most of the essential workers welcome at the airport, the customs are having suits now to cover themselves, protect themselves. Mine, I have a shield, I have my gloves, my masks and everything. But I would like also for the taxi drivers who are actually traveling with these people, even though we have the bubble, we are inside the bubble, if we could get some sort of protection covering also, and if it will be a cost of us, or if we could have, the health or the government subsidize this covering for us as taxi drivers. And thank you so very much, and keep on. Don't change that 14 days yet, because you notice that we are the best in the Caribbean. Think it's the best and always will be the best, and so continue.
Thank you so much. I will take one more call before we break to hear from our panelists. Welcome to Leadership Matters. You're live.
Yes. Good evening.
Good evening.
I have a quick question. If one can prove that they have both doses, like for the Pfizer test, and they're coming home, do they still have to quarantine?
Of your question. Thank you.
Okay.
So we have quite a number of questions that have been put to us, and we're going to try and take as many calls as possible this evening. I can assure you of that. But at this stage, let's pause to hear from our panelists. So I think at this stage, it's whoever would like to go first. We have the question about definitely the doctors. Poodles and chihuahuas being trained to sniff out persons with the virus. The question is, do these people have a special scent that they give off?
Okay, I will take that question. When someone has a respiratory infection, they produce secretions, and animals can be trained to sniff out these secretions. And there was a study that was done where they got 8 dogs that were trained to sniff persons who were positive for COVID and had respiratory illness to see whether or not they were able to identify these secretions. And they found that they were able to identify the persons who were infected with respiratory symptoms with a very high degree of sensitivity and specificity. And based on that, they started training dogs to sniff out these secretions. But the dogs will not be able to detect someone who is carrying the virus but is asymptomatic, because the sniffing is not sniffing off the virus, but the chemicals that are produced when you have a respiratory infection. And so there is some limitation to that, because when persons hear about the sniffing, they would assume that you can put the dog at the airport, and if someone is positive for COVID-19, it can sniff that person out. That won't be so.
And can our tests detect the new variants of the virus?
Okay, I wanted to add to what Dr. Wilkinson just said. I wanted to add that large-scale studies, more large-scale studies are required or needed before that approach, meaning using canines or dogs, is accepted or scaled up. Based on the information we have to date, yes, the RT-PCR test is still able to detect the SARS-CoV-2 variants.
Yes,
UK and based
South
on
Africa.
the information that we have, yes.
And I think someone asked a question about, is there any plan to reduce the quarantine from 14 to 7?
Yes.
But I think there is a caller who answered the the question, because what we said is that we would follow the science, and until we have herd immunity, until we know that our population is protected, until we know that we will not be putting persons at risk when persons come in with the virus, we will continue with the 14-day quarantine. And so, yes, we said that we were examining where we are and making changes as we move along. And so we have to wait to see what happens once the immunization process starts, and what degree of herd immunity we're able to get, and how soon we get it before we can make those changes with the quarantine procedures.
So I guess to answer their second question, if reducing the number of quarantine days would be risky, that's a yes.
Of course.
And we have about 2 questions about the vaccines.
There were. One of the callers asked if an individual provided evidence of having received 2 doses of the vaccine, if that individual would still be required to complete the quarantine. And the answer to that is yes, because if you receive the vaccine, to date, information about the vaccines is still forthcoming and evolving. And so for now, based on the science, if you are vaccinated, there isn't any guarantee that it would prevent you contracting COVID-19, and it may not prevent you transmitting the virus. And so because of these 2 gaps in data that we have so far, it is safer to say yes. If you have provided evidence of being vaccinated, you still have to quarantine for now. But the reassurance is that millions of persons have recently received these vaccines in the bigger countries, and data is being collected live. And so I'm hoping that within short order, in another month or 2, we would have the answer to those questions, and probably we can change our position in this regard.
And I just want to underscore what Dr. Law said by making the point that we know that the vaccine can help to prevent severe disease and death, but one can still get infected if they have the vaccine. And somebody who is vaccinated may still be able to transmit the virus to someone who is still vulnerable. And so just because you have 1 or 2 persons who are coming into the Federation who are vaccinated, and our population is still virgin and have no immunity, we cannot let those persons run free. They would have to be quarantined.
So at this stage, you're not able to say who will be vaccinated, when vaccinations will take place, how it will be rolled out.
Okay, and so in terms of our federation, or what's the plan going forward, we have a national vaccine deployment and implementation plan, which is going to provide us the roadmap for this. And so the thinking is that it's going to be, the approach will be like all other vaccinations. It's not mandatory, but we are going to provide the public with all the information, and for individuals to make an informed decision in terms of taking the vaccine, in terms of who will be vaccinated first. Now, I want us to realize that the demand for the vaccine far exceeds the supply. And so we are going to be getting our vaccines in tranches, and so we are going to have to prioritize in the initial phase. And so our national vaccine deployment and implementation plan will clearly stipulate who would be who would be prioritized first. And the timeline, I said it in my presentation, based on the letter we would have just received from the COVAX facility. We are thinking that probably March, April, May. So that's the end of the first quarter into the second quarter of 2021.
Just to add to that, following the World Health Organization guidelines, the recommendation is that the persons at risk be vaccinated first. So the frontline healthcare workers are the ones who are usually the first, and then the vulnerable, the persons who are in nursing homes, etc., people who may succumb from the disease, as opposed to vaccinating the healthy young under 18 persons. And
so, for example, or to be more specific, older adults with multiple morbidities, other chronic conditions like diabetes, hypertension, and conditions whereby one's immune system is compromised.
Will a new SRNO, that's I think statutory rules and order, be implemented?
We have already. Yeah.
Mr. Samuel?
Yes. The SRNO 52 of 2020 in existence, and the question was also asked in lieu of the emergency powers, what do we have? We have the Prevention and Control Act 16 of 2020, which basically gives us the same powers as the COVID-19 emergency powers that we were using in the past. Now, these are more prolonged. These are not the sharp versions that we were basically reiterating every 2 weeks, every 1 week. So these are available for persons to be able to access. You can go to covid.19.gov.kn and you should be able to see these regulations, or you can check with the legal department.
Okay. And we have a question from the taxi driver about taxi drivers being able to get coverings for further protection.
I would suggest, with respect to that they engage the tourism authority, and that matter will then be taken up by the relevant agencies thereafter. But I want to thank her for asking an important question. How do we keep our taxi operators safe, etc.? I think that is an important one, and that we keep on the constant revision. But we would like this to come basically by a coordinated approach through the Ministry of Tourism, in particular the Tourism Authority. But I'll also ask the CMO to lend a word with respect to that one.
Okay, so in terms of the taxi drivers, I want to assure them that if they were to wear their surgical face masks appropriately at all times and maintain adequate hand hygiene in terms of appropriate use of the hand sanitizer, they can add a face shield, but the face mask and the hand sanitization is crucial. And then once there's that barrier, they should be okay. They can use gloves, the disposable gloves, if they were to handle the luggage from the high-risk passenger, or if there's transfer of funds from the high-risk passenger to themselves. And so surgical face mask, plus or minus the gloves, if there's transfer of anything, and hand sanitization.
And before we go back to the phone lines, our very first caller said that they know that you being the task force and the Prime Minister, the Cabinet, the government, have been encouraging persons to wear your mask, social distance from each other, and all the different recommendations that have been made to keep us safe. And they're saying that they think that it's now time for action. Would anybody like to comment on that?
I'll start off and then kick it to without disclosing too much, just today we were speaking about a breach in one of our at one of our sites, and I was very upset, and I thought that I told her we need to start bringing down the hard hand of the law, because one can do so much to protect the public, but persons through their own selfishness decide that they're going to do things to put the entire nation at risk. And so I believe when persons who knowingly try to break quarantine, there should be a stiffer sentence, because the effects from that action can be far-reaching. One of the things that I always said is, if, for example, someone takes a gun and shoots someone, you see the effect of what you do right there. But if you choose to go into a place without a face mask, possibly being infected and exposing others, the effects of your action will only be seen 14 days later, and you might be far removed from the deleterious actions that you have done. And so I believe persons who are knowingly trying to breach quarantine, etc., we should really be putting stiffer penalties on them now.
And so in terms of action, persons, locals, if your relative or loved one is in quarantine, you have a responsibility not to interact with that individual for the duration of the quarantine. And so we shouldn't really have to bring the force of the law down, So action requires everybody, everyone, all of us have a collective responsibility to adhere to the protocols.
I would like to add in terms of action, and we have seen some action, and I really want to commend the Commissioner of Police and also Superintendent Henry and the High Command of the Police Force for the swift actions in the breach that we experienced at the Park Hyatt. The courts were closed, and even though the courts were closed, the Commissioner was able to get the legal team to come out and actually prosecute that person who would have breached our regulations. Equally so, there are several persons right now that are being considered for prosecution for breaching some of the regulations. So actions are being taken and actions will be taken. However, we will continue to educate the general public and seek compliance by persons actually being responsible.
Thank you so much for that. Just to repeat the numbers while we go back to the phone lines, if anyone would like to participate still.
Whether our local labs can detect the new variants. I think that was posed.
Yes.
Yeah, the RT-PCR test, which is offered at NextGen Lab, can detect the new variants, and this is based on the latest science so far.
So Mr. Howell, I hope you have heard that answer. Yes, we have the capacity and capability to detect the new variants.
The numbers to call, if you would still like to participate or you still have a burning question, are 466-2666, 662-8674, 767-4765, and the international line is 1-239-645-4500. If you want to send a voice note via WhatsApp, you can send it to 660-7168. And if you'd like to send a message via WhatsApp, you can send that to 661-5683. We'll go back to the phone line. Welcome to Leadership Matters. You're live.
Hi, good night.
Hi, good evening.
Yes, you hearing me?
But you'll need to lower the volume on your computer, radio, or television.
Okay, I do that. Hello?
Okay, thank you. We can hear you.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Yes, I want to ask a question to the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister had this same show saying that basically that you can able to go to the bank and get a mortgage that to build a house that you wish. And I went to the bank and I went to different bank and I get denied because the bank saying that my wages is too small. So, but the information that the Prime Minister are putting out saying that that you can go to the bank, I feed off of that information, and I went to the bank, and the bank telling me that my wages is too small. So I would like to know that a young man like me that really want to start, really want to be empowered, because I took a next step because I didn't really want to wait and the government to, to give me a house. So I took that step and I went to the bank because I wanted to empower myself. Now I got to the bank and I get declined. So I end up back in the government hands. I wanted to know that if the Prime Minister can use his power to empower me as a poor man who works for minimum wage. I just want a start. That's all I'm asking for. I just want something that I can hold accountable for, my own place. And I know the Prime Minister can help me. I know that because he said he's a compassionate Prime Minister. He loves God. If you love God, and I understand that, plus you love God and me, that to be in power, I really need a house because the Prime Minister is saying that you can go to the bank, and then when you go to the bank, it's something different. I mean, like, the system is frustrating. This system is frustrating. So young people, we need some real answers and genuine answers. So, I mean, they need to be specific for poor people, like the poor man on the street, or sitting on the street, be specific to say, okay, he cannot go to the bank and get a loan. Yes, ma'am?
Okay. I remember your call, and I understand you're frustrated, and I know the system can be frustrating, but right now, we are speaking about COVID-19 and health-related matters. Our panelists have been specially chosen to address those kinds of concerns, and I understand that the Prime Minister is here. He's here every week. However, our panelists will only be here this evening. We're not certain when they're coming back. So we've asked callers to limit their questions to the presentations being made tonight or health-related matters. What I also know is that the Prime Minister has consultations with constituents on a regular basis. You are making a direct plea to him, so if he finds it necessary to respond, he will, but we will give priority to questions that are related to the presentations, and I will encourage you to try to get to see the Prime Minister through one of those consultations so you can have that face-to-face discussion, because it is evident that you are frustrated, and we definitely would like to see young people strive in this country. So for now, we will continue with our calls. And I'm going to ask callers once again to have your questions be related to the presentations that were made this evening or health-related matters, as our panelists have been specially chosen to address those types of concerns. Not that your concerns aren't important, it's just that we have to make sure we put questions to the right people, and the people who are here this evening are from the health sector. So we'll continue taking calls. Welcome to Leadership Matters, you're live.
Hello.
Hello, good evening.
Good evening. Let me make it short and brief. I just want to ask a simple question. You think it's fair for an EMT to go to deal with a COVID case? The same EMT who are working have to come back and deal with a normal person who may be taking in or maybe in an MVA traffic accident or so? You think that is fair? That is some way you got to look at. Maybe the COVID come between you, because is human and things slip through the hands, right? And so, the next thing you have to step down on is the people who work in the hotel where the COVID patient going to, because that can bring community spread. There's a lot I have to talk, but because it's time, I will cut it short, and hopefully I will hear from you all sometime that they will come back and so I will keep the question for them. But I'm cut it short, and just those two questions are going to go for now.
Okay, well, thank you so much for those questions. We'll take another call. Welcome to Leadership Matters. You're live.
Hi, good evening.
Hi.
I would like to say good evening to the Prime Minister, host, you, Ms. Bryan, Chairman Samuel, Drs. Lars and Wilkinson. Happy New Year to all. I am calling because I was one of the inbound passengers that had a concern and have a concern. I experienced the process of as a returning traveler, and I would like to say and express that my return was at 3 tests, 3 confirmation of flight and hotel arrangements. It was very frustrating. I would like to admonish that the COVID task force remember one thing, that we are civil servants and our response time when we do take the COVID test and we do send the information back into the task force, we're looking for time-sensitive information being responded to and equal acknowledgement letter responding to, so that when we get to the airport and we have to attend to responding that we have a negative test and an approval letter, we can get on a flight. It was very difficult, and I would like to also say that even though it was difficult, I would like to commend those who assisted me, such as the P.S. Petty and the Mr. Keynes. And when we got in, the persons that at the airport, they were very professional. And I just wanted to say we must remember that we are civil servants and we have to respond in a better service time, because this does not make sense for a person to take 3 tests and rearrange flights continuously. Thank you, and do have a good night.
For sharing your experience with us and putting your concerns to the panelists. We'll take another call. Welcome to Leadership Matters.
Good evening, and how are you all doing?
Good evening.
I would like to pose my question to Hamilton, because I think he's in charge, but this is Mary Majesta Samuel Seals. Prime Minister, good night. I would like to know if the government have any system in the wire to help first-time builders. Yes, I already did my foundation, but now I want to run up my blocks. So I would like to know if the government have any program that they're running now or will be coming on stream. I did go to Miss Byron, and I don't know really what went on there, but I would like to know if there's anything in the pipeline for first-time builders in, helping, assisting in finishing their houses. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your question. Just to reiterate that at this time, we've made a note, but priority will be given to questions that relate to the presentations and health-related matters. Welcome to Leadership Matters. You're live.
Yes, hello?
Hi.
Hi. I just wanted to know what plans are in place for when the vaccine gets to St. Kitts, as to who will be receiving the vaccine first. Like what age group, how is it going to be done, distributed between both islands? That's my question.
Okay, thank you so much. That was addressed earlier, but we'd be more than happy to reiterate. Welcome to Leadership Matters. You're live. Do we have any more calls? Okay, at this point, we can address the additional questions that have been put to us, to our panelists rather.
Matters
Sure.
in fairness to those who have called and other matters. One in relation to the gentleman who called, I think, from Old Road, and the difficulty in getting the mortgage. Mortgages by nature are determined by those who are going to issue them. And yes, they would look at your salary, look at your income in order to ascertain whether you will be able to repay. So that is a critical requirement. And of course, the outcome of that cannot be determined by me. You will have to be determined based on the information that you would submit to the bank. When we discussed the mortgage plan, the mortgage was being facilitated by the government, making a certain sum of money available to the bank to assist such persons. And we had worked an arrangement where those who succeeded the processing would have their mortgage at 5%, which at the time, and perhaps still is, the lowest available mortgage generally in the country. But of course the government can, and we have put such a facility in place hundreds of persons have benefited, and that continues. But it's not everyone who will be able to benefit, because if you are living in such a way now that you have very little income in reserve, then clearly you will not be able to meet the mortgage payment. So that's just the law. The government will continue its home, its property ownership program, and the National Housing Corporation, NHC, will be the main entity engaged in the provision of homes. And the target group, of course, will be those at the lower end. So you have the option of waiting on the government, as you have put it, via the NHC, and you have the other option if your income is healthy and you can finance a mortgage at 5% or thereabout to proceed to a lending institution. One of the things we have to encourage our people to be aware that a home is a lifetime investment, and you have to plan for it, and you have to be prepared for it, because it takes serious responsibility. Maintaining it, keeping it in a state of proper repairs, all those are responsibilities of ownership. What we would like to see is more people begin to save for the future. Save to be able to have some monies, to be able to pay down on their first home, etc., etc. These are things that people have to prepare for. A lot of persons perhaps think that we should get a house, which is a good thing to want to have, and they are not making the necessary adjustment. You have to save however little so that you have something to invest in your home. That is going to be important for us to adjust our expectation with respect to that. The demand for housing in St. Kitts and perhaps elsewhere is very high. And almost everyone, and reaching 18 or perhaps younger, would say, I need a home. But it's not a realistic expectation if we want to be very brutally honest. At 18, how many persons would have saved enough to be able to invest properly into a home? And these considerations are things, again, we have to prepare. You can't have a lifetime asset unless it is bequeathed to you and you haven't worked for any period of time. So again, the discipline of hard work, the discipline of having something in account, the discipline of managing our expenses, all these will assist us to get where we want to be within a particular time frame. It brings me to the other issue on housing raised by the female caller, I think Mary Samuel, if I'm not mistaken, about the first-time homeowners program. This is another program that the government has continued in order to ensure that we make it easier for persons who are building their first home to be able to acquire such by reducing or waiving the costs of the duty. So the duty and all materials required to build your homes under the first-time homeowners program, you will be waived. That is, you will not have to pay that. That is a significant saving for those who are engaged in home building. To access this, you apply to the Ministry of Finance. And every year, we have a number of persons, scores of persons who participated. Indeed, I think last year, close to $30 million worth of materials were waived. Well, the duty and those materials were waived. So that program is active, and we encourage those who are building their first home to participate in that particular program. So I think that answers the two questions on home ownership. We encourage persons to get excited about home ownership, but to make the necessary investment to be able to do so. Again, there are private routes and there are the public sector routes, and those options will be available for the immediate future. Thank you, Jackie.
Thank you. Certainly.
Very important. Okay, so that caller asked if our local labs are able to detect the new variants, the 3 variants. And I said yes, because the RT-PCR test offered by the local lab can detect if you're positive for COVID-19. However, if we want to identify what variant, that requires a special test. The sample will have to be sent off to CARFA for viral genomic sequencing for us to be able to identify if it's the UK variant, the Brazil variant, or the South African variant. So the local lab can detect that you're positive and that you have COVID, but it's not able to tell us what type or what strain. Yeah, it requires further evaluate. The sample will require further evaluation, a specific test, viral genomic sequencing. This has to be done at the Caribbean Public Health Agency in Trinidad.
Thank you so much for that additional information regarding the tests and the variants. We had a caller who had concerns about 2 matters. If emergency medical technicians who respond to COVID cases and deal with COVID patients should also be responding to other patients without the virus. And their other concern was that hotel workers might be able to spread the virus if they work at hotels where a visitor has tested positive, and they may run a risk of coming in contact with that visitor. So can you speak to those?
I can deal with the hotel workers.
Yes.
Okay.
Now, if you think about it, if every time a healthcare worker looked after someone who was possibly positive with COVID-19 and they were exempt from other duties, we would deplete our health force. Now, the important thing, if you are dealing with persons who are possibly positive, is to make sure that you have the proper PPE. And so this EMT who called, the person who was calling on behalf of the EMT, if you are going to be dealing with someone who has a flu-like illness and is suspected of having COVID-19, I say that because we don't necessarily have any persons in the hospital right now who are diagnosed with COVID-19. But if you're wearing the proper mask, the face shield, gloves, gown, etc., then once you derobe, you can go back to your normal duties. And so there isn't a reason for any exemption from other duties just because you were handling somebody who were positive or possibly positive with COVID-19.
Okay, so in terms of the hotel workers, I want to bring to our attention that since our borders were reopened on October 31st to present, we've had an increase in 20 cases. When our borders were open, we were at 19, now we are at 39. And so our hotel workers and our frontline workers along the corridor of containment from the airport to the quarantine sites have been exposed to these 20 cases, and as far as we know, they adhere to the robust protocols that we have in place, and this prevented the spread of the infection from worker to their family members and the community. And so the point I'm making is that the hotel workers, depending on their duties, they have to wear appropriate personal protective gear, and they have to adhere to the robust protocols in that facility. And if they do, that would reduce their risk of picking up the infection from the positive case. And to date, there is no evidence that this has happened.
We had the person who recently returned to the Federation raise a concern that communication is not as quick as it ought to have been, and that the delays actually caused them some inconveniences. So is there anything you can say to that, Mr. Samuel? Can you address that one?
All right. Jackie, thank you, and thank the caller for the question or the concerns raised. No, the entry system has 4 components to it. It has a health screening process. It has an immigration screening process. It also has a customs, and finally, an approval that comes from the Ministry of National Security. One of the things that we are seeing over the past time is persons uploading their tests, and when they upload their tests, they are uploading the wrong tests. They also are uploading just a portion of the test, whereby the persons who are screening these tests are not able to see the entirety of the test. Also, persons are loading tests that are passed beyond the 72 hours, and they still are expecting persons to do miracles. And we have stated clearly that we will not compromise or jeopardize unless there is a special circumstance that require us to do so. And the person sometimes go to the airport expecting that their test will return within a specific time, and when they reach to the airport and the test is not uploaded, then they are requesting to come to the Federation without a test. The travel and the health travel protocols, they are clear. They outline what is required. For example, you must have that negative RT-PCR test 72 hours prior to embarkation of that flight. You must have a quarantine space or vacationing in place where you are going to. Again, it must be between the 72, you must be the right test from an accredible lab as outlined in the protocols. And you must have also you must answer the appropriate questions. You also have to have the appropriate travel document for immigration purposes. Once all of these basically meet the criteria, then the persons processing these will actually process you. No, Jackie, communication I don't think is bad. There are several numbers. You have persons working around the clock, taking calls, and if you call and somebody don't answer you, we also have the availability of WhatsApp platforms. You have email addresses, and we have persons who actually call persons overseas to let them know, from customs and immigration and everyone, who also informs them that they need to meet this criteria in order for the process to be completed. If you do not meet the criteria and you do not provide the appropriate information, you're going to have a challenge in having the persons working behind the scene to process these applications, approving them. So that is some of the challenges that persons are found. They are not completing the forms appropriately.
I would want to add, though not to detract from what Abdes is saying, that the system is still relatively new to persons who are attempting to come home, and new to us. And therefore, what we can promise tonight is that we will review them. We will have a review of the system, how efficient they are, because we do feel for those who are attempting to come home and who, as the caller would have said, have had to do repeat tests. Clearly, then we will have to improve our communication with them and they with us to mitigate the inconveniences of getting back to our country. So we will look at that and to see whether we need, for example, to add new manpower. We can simplify forms and information to make the experience of coming back home to be a much more pleasant one. That is commitment that I could make tonight.
And thank you so much for adding that, Mr. Prime Minister. At this stage, we're going to take a break. And when we come back, we're going to address any final messages or questions that would have come through on the other platforms, and the panelists will make their closing statements. So sit tight and we'll be right back.
As we get ready to serve, it is important that we improve our vehicles to ensure the safety of our guests and ourselves. Outfit your vehicle with appropriate dividers to separate driver from passenger, plexiglass A Velcro plastic divider may be used. Have a minimum of 2 hand sanitizers, one for you and one for your guests. Always carry extra mask and disinfectant in your vehicle. And post signs to remind passengers to use hand sanitizers and wear their mask and follow social distancing protocols.
When providing a service, it is important that the hands of the passengers are sanitized before entering the vehicle. Remember, a mask must always be worn by all occupants of the vehicle for the duration of the trip. At the end of the trip, remember to wish your passengers a good day. Ensure they have left no personal items behind and sanitize their hands.
Once you have completed your trip, remember to sanitize your hands and your vehicle. Seats must be disinfected and all high-touch areas, such as doors and seat handles, must be sanitized before your next trip. Let's do all we can to keep ourselves and our visitors safe.
As we get ready to serve.
Thanks to the nation's unified response, the spread of COVID-19 has been contained. St. Kitts and Nevis, therefore, announces the opening of their border on October 31st, 2020. The success of this strategy requires effort on everyone's part. People from all walks of life must keep practicing social distancing. Maintain a separation of 6 feet or 2 meters indoors and 3 to 4 feet or 1 meter outdoors. If this isn't possible, masks must be properly worn. Businesses can provide hand sanitizer, conduct temperature checks, record customers' contact information, and manage crowds. Clean and sanitize high-touch areas regularly. Dividers or staggered seating can be used to maintain proper social distance. This protects workers and customers and prevents the spread of disease. We all have an individual and collective responsibility to avoid large social gatherings. These types of gatherings are deemed as super spreader events. Taking disease prevention seriously will enable a worry-free return to normal life.
The St. Kitts and Nevis Chamber of Industry and Commerce would like to remind persons when patronizing businesses to abide by the following COVID-19 guidelines to protect employees, customers, and our community. Urge employers to check employees and customers with a non-contact head thermometer on arrival to a business place. It's mandatory that employees wear a face mask when at work and in the presence of others. No customers will be permitted to enter an establishment without a face mask. Encourage both employees and customers to wash their hands with soap and water or sanitize their hands with an alcohol-based hand sanitizer of at least 60% alcohol when entering a building, after interacting with customers, and throughout the day. Remember to maintain 6 feet physical and social distancing. Consider installing barriers such as sneeze guards or partitions in high traffic areas to limit close contact between employees and customers. Clean and disinfect highly touched surfaces such as doorknobs, telephones, cash registers, bathrooms, tables, and countertops regularly throughout the day. Offer e-commerce services or curbside pickup options wherever possible. Encourage good hygiene practices among staff and customers by posting signs and posters in the business place. For more information and tips to consider, visit www.covid19.gov.kn.
We are all in this together.
And we all have a part to play to keep our island COVID-free.
Play your part and stay safe and healthy.
Our borders will soon be reopened. Get ready.
So what are you doing to keep St. Kitts COVID-free?
Those persons returning or coming in from a Caribbean bubble territory. And the second category involves persons coming in from outside of the Caribbean bubble territory. And I mean persons who would be coming in from the USA, United Kingdom, and further afield. And even persons coming in from Jamaica and Dominican Republic, they all fall into that other category, which carries a significant risk of exposure to the virus. So the question is, if I am a traveler and I'm thinking of coming to St. Kitts and Nevis, what are the pre-arrival requirements? Well, you will be asked to log on to the site, the website, the URL www.knatravelform.kn. There you will see the St. Kitts and Nevis entry form, which Ophelia Blanchard would have just walked you through. And so every traveler coming into the Federation will be required to complete this entry form. So if you're coming in by air or by sea, you would have to complete this form. You would also be required to provide us the result of a PCR test that must be done within 3 days of travel. So if you are coming to St. Kitts this Saturday, you would have had to go to your lab today, this morning, and to get your sample taken, test process, to get the result by Thursday, Friday, ahead of boarding the plane on October the 31st. This PCR test must be done at an ISO accredited laboratory in the traveler's host country. And so what I've been telling travelers, just Google, just put in your home address and Google for the nearest ISO accredited laboratory in your area where you can access this service. Next. Okay, so if I am coming to St. Kitts and Nevis from a Caribbean territory, what are the requirements? What are the entry requirements? So let's bring it closer home. If I'm coming to St. Kitts from Anguilla, if I'm coming to St. Kitts from Montserrat, what should I do? You have to log on to the site and complete the entry form. You also have to provide us with a negative PCR test done within 3 days of travel. Please note that you should have been residing in that CARICOM bubble territory for at least 21 days in order for you to be considered a part of this Caribbean bubble. So in other words, you cannot come from New York or Miami and go to Anguilla and spend 3 days and come to St. Kitts and expect to be considered as part of the Caribbean bubble. You really should have been residing in Anguilla or Montserrat for at least 21 days. And then
Welcome back to Leadership Matters, and as we prepare to bring our program to a close, we will address some of the questions and comments that we got on our other platforms. But before we do so, I'd like to give the WhatsApp numbers again to the individuals who called regarding housing and getting assistance. If you can send a message or contact 660-7168, that's 660-7168, or 661-5683, 661-5683. Someone will be in contact with you. So I've been asked to share those numbers with you, and you're being asked to send a message to those numbers. So hopefully you can get that remedied. We will move on to the questions we got via the other platforms. I will just read to you what those questions are. I've already shared them with the panelists so you can be aware of the issues that they'll be addressing. The first question is on hemodialysis. It reads, PM Harris, I know we are focusing on COVID-19 tonight, but I have a burning health question. I recently heard that there is an upper limit age cutoff for hemodialysis at our hospital. If this is so, it would cause me to be worried about my aging relatives if they fall ill and their kidneys fail. Can you shed some light on this matter? The next one reads, Russia and China vaccines are the best and are much cheaper. Why did St. Kitts not buy vaccines from those countries? The next reads, good night panelists. I was concerned when I visited the hospital and the nurse who attended to me was clearly congested and sneezing. Yes, she had on a mask, but was surprised that she was working. Probably it was allergies, but she should not be directly involved with patients as this causes concerns. Then we have a question that asks, why is sports getting so much trouble to have functions because of social distancing, but entertainers are having parties every weekend in confined, closed areas with crowds? And finally, this question asks, hi, is there any thought to using herbal remedies and not just relying on COVID vaccines? So those questions have been put to our panelists and in no particular order. Thank you for volunteering.
On the question of access to hemodialysis, I want to make it clear that my own personal view and that of the government is that health care for all is an important imperative which we must meet. And we want all to have access to health services as deemed medically necessary. With regard to the age cutoff, I personally am not aware of the existence of such a policy. But we have two health practitioners here in Dr. Cameron Wilkinson and the CMO. I'll perhaps ask Dr. Wilkinson to explain to us what is the policy that is now in vogue at our hospitals.
Thank you. Well, let me start with a little background. The dialysis unit was opened in September 2013, and it was not until the following year, September 2014, that we dialyzed our first patient. In 2014, we had a total of 3 patients who were requiring dialysis. Today, we have 30 patients, and so that's a tenfold increase in the number of persons needing dialysis over the last 6 years. Now, each person, when they go for dialysis, they require at least 3 treatments per week, and each treatment lasts approximately 4 hours. So with the 30 patients we have right now, that is 360 hours of dialysis per week. And if you do the calculation, 1 week has 168 hours. Therefore, the dialysis unit is actually running some long hours. They operate from 6 a.m. to 9 p.m. Daily from Monday to Saturday. And the only day that they have any downtime is Sunday, when they do the recharging and cleaning, etc. We started initially with 4 machines, and we moved to 6 as the demand increased, and there is plan to increase even further up to 8 machines to accommodate the increasing number of persons that require dialysis. It's important for the general public to know, however, that is not every person who has kidney failure requires dialysis. It depends on the severity of the kidney failure and other factors. And so based on that, there are a number of criteria that were established to determine, and this was done way back in 2013, to determine who gets hemodialysis. And there is no one factor or no one criterion in this list of criteria that will eliminate someone from having dialysis. And so I just want to go through briefly what are the criteria. So age is important, And we start from the age of 10, and we have blocks of 10, like 10 to 20, 20 to 21, all the way up to 70 and over 70. We also look at what's called the glomerular filtration rate, which is a factor that determines the severity of the kidney failure. So if someone has a GFR of 30, they're treated medically. But persons who have a GFR between 15 and 20, those are persons who are considered for dialysis. Other criteria, we look at whether or not they have symptoms of kidney failure, like shortness of breath, hiccups, etc., and the type of kidney failure they have. If someone has acute kidney failure, where the kidney fails suddenly, and they just need some dialysis to tie them over before their kidneys recover. We also look at persons who would have donated a kidney to a relative so that they're only functioning with one kidney. And so these persons would be considered a higher priority. Persons also who may need dialysis while they are preparing for transplant, so they're just getting tied over until they go away for transplant. Those persons would be considered. We also look at the existing disease that the person has and whether or not the disease that they have is a good prognosis, because you can have someone who has severe uncontrolled diabetes, hypertension, cardiac failure or heart failure, and in addition to that they have kidney failure, but their prognosis is so poor from the other existing diseases that dialyzing them would not change the outcome. And we also consider the length of time that the persons would have been on the waiting list. And so we look at all of these criteria together in determining who gets dialysis. So there is no one factor. So it is erroneous to say that there is a cutoff age. Everything is considered. But at the end of it, if you have a 5-year-old child who needs dialysis and a 99-year-old person who needs dialysis, then in terms of the criteria, the 5-year-old will score higher on the list than the 99-year-old. But one last point I want to make, though, the major cause of kidney failure in our society has to do with uncontrolled diabetes and hypertension, these non-communicable diseases. And this is why we emphasize primary health care, because this is available to everyone. But as we start to get end organ damage from these known diseases and one needs tertiary level care, that becomes less accessible, in terms of not just kidney disease, but if you need a heart transplant or coronary artery bypass, these are things that are not available to every single one. And so that's one of the reasons why we emphasize the importance of exercise, healthy eating, taking your medications for diabetes and hypertension that are subsidized by the government to make sure that you don't end up on a waiting list for dialysis.
Thank you so much for that. And the next question regarding vaccines from Russia and China.
Okay, very good question. I wanted to begin by saying that the vaccines from Russia and China, they have not yet received approval by the World Health Organization emergency use listing procedure. And they are also not available through the COVAX facility. Yeah? And so these are two prerequisites for the vaccines that are made accessible to us.
We also have the question about the nurse at the hospital. I take it, Dr. Wilkinson, you would address that?
Okay, well, what I want to say is that people have been coughing and sneezing for centuries and not necessarily secondary to COVID-19 disease. And there are a number of reasons why people can cough and sneeze. The most common one will be allergies. And an allergy can act up at any point in time. So it doesn't necessarily mean because you go to the hospital and somebody might be a little stuffy that those persons need to be taken out of the equation. Again, if we have such stringent policies where everyone who sneezes or coughs, we take them out, then you might go to the hospital and there will be no one to look after you. And so I believe although the person said that having that person directly looking after someone raises concerns, we would not put anyone who is contagious or infectious to look after persons. And so it doesn't mean that just because somebody coughs or sneezes that they should be taken off the working list.
And since you have the floor, are you also able to speak to using herbal remedies and not just relying on the vaccine, the COVID-19 vaccine?
Well, you know why I'm smiling? Because almost every single morning I stop by sherry and buy a cup of lemongrass tea. And so I believe in my herbal remedies, but not at the expense of science. And so, yes, if someone believes in herbal remedies, I'm not going to dissuade them from using that. But when the vaccine becomes available that we know scientifically will help you, then you need to take the vaccine. Prior to the vaccine, if you were sick and we knew that using dexamethasone or putting on a ventilator will help you, then you cannot ignore that science and use herbal remedies alone.
I want to add, to date, 102.8 million persons have been diagnosed with COVID, and over 2.2 million persons have died. And I'm almost sure that a significant proportion of them have used herbal remedies, but they have been impacted by COVID-19, and so I don't think we can solely depend on herbal remedies. And so the scientific information tells us that the vaccine works, and so we need to rely on that information also. Herbal remedies can be utilized to boost your own immune system, but in terms of preventing the disease, I don't think you can totally depend on that.
And finally, the question regarding why sports, the person is alleging that sports is getting a lot of trouble to have functions. Mr. Samuel, can you speak to that?
Ms. Brian, I don't foresee that sports is getting any trouble in having activities. Actually, way back in August of last year, sports under the restrictions of the COVID-19 regulations were able to function. That's one of the activities that actually were restricted early on. Today, we continue to work with the sporting community under the context of COVID-19, using international regulations from FIFA in collaboration with WHO and also the FIBA and other sporting communities to ensure that there is protection for the players, the support staff, and also the attendants. So therefore, there are no impediments, restrictions. The only thing is that we have to understand that we are dealing with a pandemic, we are experiencing a pandemic, and we have to ensure the safety of the athletes and everyone else who are participating in these activities. So it's not business as usual, it's business unusual in these times.
And since you have the floor, I think in reverse order of the opening presentations, we can have our closing statements made. So we'll have you first, Mr. Samuel, followed by Dr. Laws, then Dr. Wilkinson, and the Prime Minister will bring the program to a close.
All right. Thank you, Jackie. And I wish to engage the general public this evening by asking you to continue the fight with us in getting St. Kitts and Nevis to a state whereby we can reach normalcy in a quick time by, one, adapting to the protocols and measures. Make these protocols and measures a part of our daily lives until we overcome this pandemic. Two, we have to listen to the science and the medical experts, and I would like to see St. Kitts and Nevis becomes one of the countries that are vaccinated fast and furious, as you can say, and ensure that we reach that herd immunity that we need to. Now, we can get 1 million vaccine, but if as a country we do not take the vaccine or educate ourselves to accepting the vaccine, then we will not make headway. So I'm appealing to all. I want to ask the citizens to continue to be responsible. And if you see something, say something. I want to thank all the hard-working individuals within the public sector, private sector, who continue to support the work that is being done, not only by the COVID-19 task force, but also by the government of St. Kitts and Nevis. And let's continue to be a resilient nation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Samuel. Dr. Laws?
Thank you, Jackie. Ladies and gentlemen, we have been managing our COVID response for 1 year now. To date, we've only reported 39 cases and 0 deaths. Our protocols are working. Let us not take them for granted. Let's adhere to our protocols. Let's hold strain. Let's await and accept the COVID-19 vaccines in order to prevent community transmission. In so doing, we can kickstart and our economy can rebound. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Wilkinson?
I just want to use my time here to remind persons that the crisis is not over, the war against the virus is not over, and we can't afford to become complacent, because we can go back to a state of curfews and lockdown if we start to get community spread. I also want to remind persons that the virus cannot move from point A to point B without your help. It has to hitch a ride from you, and you need to make sure you do everything to leave it where it is by social distancing, sanitizing, and wearing your mask to block it. I also want to let you know that the vaccines that we are going to be getting are safe. And as a demonstration of this, if the CMO deems that I'm one of the persons who may get the vaccine, I will willingly take it to prove to persons that it is safe.
Thank you so much. And finally, Mr. Prime Minister.
Thank you very much, Jackie, for hosting the program tonight. And special thank you to our 3 panelists, Dr. Wilkinson, Dr. Laws, and Mr. Samuel, for participating in what has been a very informative and insightful program. I got a WhatsApp all the way from Florida from someone in the health fraternity, Nurse Garnett, who has been a matron at our hospital, and she said that she had been listening and she was satisfied with the level of discussion and the information that has been imparted. It has become true for many persons around the world, as it were. They pay attention to leadership matters. It's one of those unique programs in the country where we don't get involved in gossip, but we deal with real issues in a manner that brings credibility to public discussion. And specifically, our own outreach and public information with respect to COVID-19 is one of the best in the world. And many of our national tell us that they listen to the regular briefings and they are better advised and better prepared than they are in jurisdictions outside of St. Kitts and Nevis. We are at a critical stage in this fight against the COVID-19, and we must make every effort to defeat it. For a very long time, and it still continues to be true, that the world is in a reactive mode. The virus is moving ahead of us. We are having new variants, and each time we are having to react. So we have to get ahead of it, and that could only come over time with better information, better confirmation of the various strategies that work. In this regard, I want to thank the people of St. Kitts and Nevis for their cooperation to date, and the cooperation must continue to be at the highest level. And I would want us not to let our guard down. To those at the front line, we want you not to let your guard down. Our doctors, our nurses, our emergency technicians, customs, immigrations, you know who you are. The country is still counting on you. And you have to, by your own example, comply with the protocols and encourage others so to do. Equally important are our bus operators, or the passengers and the bus, we have again to rekindle the sense of urgency in the compliance with the protocols that are now available and well known. The wearing of the mask, the frequent hand hygiene, and of course the physical distancing. All these have helped us to contain the virus in St. Kitts and Nevis, and we must abide by them. I agree with the caller who recommended that we up the response and that there be some form of penalty. In other words, the consequences for non-compliance have to be real and have to be felt. And therefore, again, at the front line, the law enforcement officers have to be reminded of their special duty and responsibility to uphold the laws. And we would want, it doesn't have to come to a situation where persons have to be fined, have to be taken to the court. There must be willing compliance, because the life that you save may very well be your own. Again, we are at a relatively good place. We are hopeful that once the vaccine does come in the close to during March or shortly thereafter, and we get the bulk of our population vaccinated, our target is to have at least 70% of the population. Based on the resources that we have committed, we certainly believe that we have enough or should be able to meet that target. So we are confident about that. But until the all clear is given, each of us have to do our very best. Dr. Wilkerson said that I said something when we first met to have the discussion. It's really something that had impacted me in a conversation with Professor Rex Nettleford. And as he did his usual talks about where we are as a Caribbean people, how we will take our place of pride in the world, one of his important expressions was always, all we have is us. All we have is us. And he reminded me way back then, at a tumultuous period in Jamaica, when it was that there were difficulties and protests in the streets regarding very difficult circumstances at that period of time. 1831 was before the emancipation period. There were protests. And a petition was being sent off to the Queen. The response came back from the Queen. It is to their industry and ingenuity to which the subjects must look for their own salvation. I believe the substance of both is the same. All we have is us. All we have is our own determination to be the best that we can be. And we have to strive for that always as a people and a nation. We want to be always the model of the best managed small island state. That is what I have echoed from time to time. And in the management of the COVID-19 so far, we have seen that that is not just an empty wish. That is something that we really can do. And each time we do good, we can hope and we can try to do better. So we have done a good job so far. Thanks to all of the citizens. Thanks to the all of society approach, which we have successfully implemented. We now must go to a higher heights, even at this critical juncture. So that if we conquer the challenge now, the safer and stronger future, which we are committed as a government to deliver, can become yours. The citizens and residents will enjoy that stronger and safer future. Your welfare and your well-being will be enhanced by the collective actions of all of us. So thanks again for taking note. Thanks again for tuning in. And thanks for the interaction. The insights that have come are well welcome. And I want to thank each of you and hope for the next edition of Leadership Matters you do tune in. And for those, according to Bucky, who are harassing him, we want Bucky to continue to be the people's voice, to ask the questions which some are afraid to ask for themselves, being our brother's keeper. And Jackie may add our sister's keeper is an important part of our collective good.
Indeed.
So we thank all of those who are brave enough to air their voice and program like this. There is no foolish question. We welcome all of them. We thank you all, and may God continue to bless the people of this beloved country of St. Kitts and Nevis.
Thank you, Mr. Prime Minister. That brings us to the end of this segment of Leadership Matters, which airs weekly on ZIZ radio, television, and online platforms, Facebook and YouTube. And I want to thank you as well for tuning in, listening, watching, and participating. I hope you found the program informative and engaging. Do enjoy the rest of your evening, and we'll see you next time.
Okay, we're going to take